Photosynthesis. How do these organisms do it? Well, they're pretty amazing. Wish I could do it, but not possible just yet. So here's that diagram we took a look at in the cellular respiration chapter. And again, I want to emphasize that the products of one process are the reactants for the other. So the products of cell respiration, water and carbon dioxide being the two big ones, and of course ATP. But we're not using those for photosynthesis here. We're using the water and the carbon dioxide, along with energy from the sun. And these autotrophs, because they can do it all by themselves, they can make their own food in the form of glucose. So we're going to go through the process today in terms of how these two major molecules are utilized and how glucose is made. And then also we'll see where oxygen comes into play here in terms of its production in this process. Okay. So the major site of photosynthesis, now it's not exclusive to just the leaves, but the major site in most plants, and we're going to be focusing on plants in this tutorial, is that major site of photosynthesis. And we're going to be focusing again on plants and looking at the structure of the chloroplast, the major organelle of photosynthesis. This diagram is a little blurry, and I apologize for that, but it gives you the general idea. And just like with mitochondria, we have two membranes, an outer and an inner membrane, and an intermembrane space. But all of those membranes and that space in this process are really not very important. The important structures and spaces are actually to the inside of the inner membrane. And just to the inside of the inner membrane is a space called the stroma. Very important space. And then we have these stacks of membranes called thylakoid membrane, or each one of the individual, I guess you can say, pieces or parts of the stack are a thylakoid, and then a whole stack together is called a granum. But we're going to focus on thylakoid. So we have a thylakoid membrane and then a thylakoid space. So the important spaces here in photosynthesis are the stroma, the thylakoid membrane, and then the thylakoid space. Very important for you to understand. All right, so before we get to the actual process, we're going to take a look at the overall reaction, the major reactants and major products. Again, this doesn't show all of the reactants and all of the products. It really is giving us the major reactants and major products, and that is what I want you to focus on. Again, I'm not going to ask you for the coefficients here, these numbers. I really want you to focus in on the major molecules, major reactants, carbon dioxide, water, sun, producing glucose, water, and oxygen. And as you can see, looking at cellular respiration, they're roughly the opposite, or roughly the opposite of one another. So the products of one are the reactants for the other, roughly, and then the products of this other one are the reactants for, or products of cell respiration are the major reactants for photosynthesis. All right, so photosynthesis consists of two major steps. We have something called the light reactions, because that's where the sunlight is utilized, and we need light, we need the sun to shine in order for these reactions to occur. So we're taking sun or solar energy and we're making two major products here, ATP and this wonderful molecule called NADPH. This should look very familiar if you've taken a look at cellular respiration. It looks very similar to NADH, and it is very similar to NADH, but it is the plant or the photosynthesis electron carrier. So it's carrying electrons. It's a high energy molecule. And we're going to be using these major products of the light reactions to run something called the Calvin cycle. So that's where we use these products. They become major reactants for the Calvin cycle, and that's where we use our carbon dioxide along with the ATP and the electron carrier NADPH to make some sugar, glucose. Okay. So two steps, a two-step process. So this gives you kind of a cartoon view of what's going on. Here we have the outer membrane, the intermembrane space, and the inner membrane. Again, those are not important in photosynthesis. The spaces that are important, all this space in here is the stroma. Here are the granum. Individual parts of this granum stack, discs, are thylakoids. So the thylakoid membrane is very important. And then inside of the thylakoid is the thylakoid space, another very important space in photosynthesis. So we use water, one of our major reactants, and light. So those are two of the three major reactants we're using here in the light reactions. And we're going to produce oxygen, and there's our ATP and NADPH. And then we're going to be using the ATP and the NADPH in the Calvin cycle, which occurs in the stroma, to make sugar. And there we have our CO2. We'll be using CO2 along with the ATP and NADPH to make sugar, glucose. All right, so that's a nice kind of overview of the two processes. Okay.